Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. You know who I am, I know who you are, and it's lovely to have this time to share with you. So thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a great week this week. Busy, if anything, but I am midway through July, and I believe that I am finished my deciduous repotting for the year, which is a relief, to be honest, because my hands are killing me. Fingers find it very difficult to close when I get out of bed in the mornings these days because of all the heavy root work. But I've worked hard, I've worked fast because I've got a lot on for the rest of this month with repotting with other people's trees. So I need to get mine done. And part of the process I go through with my repotting is the aftercare, which is massive. It's probably one of the most important parts of repotting that I find. And I get asked a lot, you've started really early. Why are you starting early? Well, a couple of things. That the trees seeing or understanding or feeling that the daylight hours are getting longer. Not necessarily warm where I am in Melbourne. It's chilly. It's cold. As I look outside now, it's about 4 degrees and been raining overnight. So it's cold, it's wet, it's miserable. And even though it's not a conducive time for me as a person to be outside, trees know that the daylight hours are getting longer, so they're starting to wake up from dormancy. That's the cold hard fact of it, that they are waking up. So even though you might feel that there's cold snaps and there's, the weather's not conducive to growing, it's not warm, it doesn't necessarily need to be. It's just got to have longer daylight hours. Once we get past that shortest day of the year and things start to move again, trees start waking up. And I did notice that over the 2-week period of flat-out repotting, that the trees coming towards the latter part of that 2 weeks had a lot more new root growth in there. And as they've sat in the workshop, that's part of the aftercare that I was alluding to before, is that they stay in my workshop for a period of about 3 weeks to make sure that everything's okay out of the elements. So the frosts that come overnight aren't going to have a massive impact on the root system or on the new the new gentle light branches that have grown prior to dormancy. And everything's okay. So now I'm noticing that as I look around, I use sphagnum moss on top of the trees, and a couple of things that does. But one of the things is it's like a telltale for me to let me know when the root system starts to wake up, because when that sphagnum's wet, it's a real orange colour when it's fresh and powdery on the root ball. But as they start to take up that moisture and the sphagnum starts to dry out, it starts to turn white again. So I can look across the bench of 50 odd trees that have been repotted in one area, and I can see the trees that are waking up earlier than others because the sphagnum moss starts to go white. So I can use that as my telltale to say, hey, look, you're spot on with your timing for repotting, and give those ones a little bit of water because they're starting to take it up. And I use that as a bit of an indicator for me to know that once that they start taking up the water, you have a look at the buds have all swollen and starting to move, and some have started to pop. Give that a little while, let that growth start to harden off, and then they'll transition to a more sheltered part of my yard that will protect them if there is a frost overnight or something like that. But they'll start moving out into the exposed area of the yard as opposed to being inside the yard. So that's what I've been up to lately, is bucket loads of repotting and making big forests for people, which is a common thing lately. I've been doing lots and lots of forests, 20, 30 odd trees per forest, pots, up to about 1 metre wide. It's been great. It's been really good. And the planning process for that is really, really enjoyable. Also had Hirotoshi Sato come to my yard, which was a great privilege. People around Victoria and Australia may remember him. He used to come out here a long time ago, pre that COVID time, and visit. And he's a great artist, a very lovely person, and I had the privilege of him coming to the yard, and that was something that I won't forget. It was very nice. So anyway, let's start ploughing into this podcast, because enough about me. Let's talk about what we can do together. And with repotting, it's obviously a really busy time for all of us, and some of the things I want to talk about are pot size considerations and a few, common mistakes or common things that I see that maybe could be done a little bit differently. Not mistakes, but just could be changed around a little bit. I want to talk about securing your trees in the pot. Obviously, very timely for that as well. And also, as we get into this mid to late winter section of the season, it's just a bit of housekeeping and things that I'm doing around the yard as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. before I get into this pots, I just want to loop back around to. It really annoys me when people say that. Circle back around to. But anyway, I want to talk again about Hero and how he came out to Victoria and did some country stuff, and it's just looking at the crowd of people that came along. It's so nice when you can get along to these events. Bonsai Society of Victoria put him on, hosted him, and Shed him went through Bendigo as well. And it's lovely that he got to see a bit of the countryside and also see a hell of a lot of people while he was here. But it's like a shot in the arm for everybody that comes to these things. It's that invigorates you. It spurs you on. It provides that momentum that sometimes when you lose the spark a little bit or the spark becomes a little bit dull, getting yourself along to these events, wherever they are, anywhere around the world with different people talking, you may not necessarily need to fully agree with everything that they say or be a follow disciple of what they do. But I love the fact that this gets bonsai people together and it invigorates everybody and being able to travel the country for myself, very short period of time, I'm heading up to Cairns and to Brisbane, and I've got a long time over in Western Australia in Perth with people, and I'm so excited because I see it as part of what I do is to provide that spark and that real pump everyone up, get that vigor, get everyone wanting to spend time with their trees and just to re-energise enthusiasts, and that's what I saw recently with this visit from this international Japanese master coming to Australia. So, if you just I suppose a bit of a push for everybody. If you do see these things in your local area, if someone is putting someone on, or there's someone coming to your region, then get along to it because it's great for you to be sort of pumped up again. And you, like I said, you don't necessarily need to walk out of there as a convert or anything like that, but just being around bonsai people and seeing bonsai, it's so good for us. Anyway, repotting. Let's get back on track. Repotting. Pot size considerations. Now, one of the most common, I'm going to call it a mistake, but don't take it the wrong way. One of the most common mistakes that I see is that people are opting for pots that are just too large for their trees. All right, I think that your aim with bonsai, if you look at bonsai anywhere on the internet, books, magazines, wherever it is, and you get that buzz and say, that's a beautiful tree, that is magnificent, that's as good as it gets. Stop looking at the tree and come back and look at the pot. And a couple of things to do with the pot. Look at the width of the pot compared to the bonsai itself. And I think that you'll find more often than not, the pot is going to be nowhere near as big as the foliage canopy on the bonsai. And that's one of the things that I aim for is to, I don't like the rule of it, but I like to aim with my bonsai pots to have them that they're about, 2/3, 3/4 the width of the canopy of the bonsai. Sometimes they get too small and I've got to enlarge them, but I never break that thought in my head that, hey, this thing cannot be bigger than about 2/3, 3/4 the width of the canopy. And it's a major thing because when if you play around with it with your own trees, when you walk out there and get a pot that's massive and get one of your favourite trees in the yard and hold a massive pot up in front of a big heavy pot in front of that tree, and you'll see that the tree suddenly starts to lose its oomph, its attractiveness to you, because suddenly the tree starts to dwindle in significance compared to the pot. Whereas if you get a pot, like let's say you've got a tree that you love and it's in a massive pot at the moment, get a smaller pot and just visualize it. Go and hold it in front of that tree and have it where the pot comes in inside the canopy width of the tree that you're looking at, and suddenly have a look at it and that tree will pop. It'll look amazing. And I always think that when you take a photo or see a photo of any bonsai anywhere around the world, whatever it is, it doesn't matter the size of the tree, and if there's no gauge there for you to see the height or dimensions of that tree, then it shouldn't matter whether that tree is 10 centimetres tall or 2 metres tall. The proportions and the pot size should scale accordingly to fit that criteria. Now, it doesn't mean that you get the first potting. This is another part. I'm going to put a proviso on this section of the podcast, because if you're coming out of a plastic grow tub or any kind of grow tub and you're going down towards a bonsai pot, don't use that guideline. Don't try and go to an ultra small pot the very first time that it comes out of a tub. We'll call it a tub because it's be different for everyone around the world. But when it comes out of its first growing pot, don't aim to put it into a tiny little bonsai pot, because you'll do more damage than good with this thing. What you've got to do is you've got to have a plan to reduce down towards the pot size that you want, and it may not happen this year, it may not happen next year, but it's something that eventually, as that tree gets better and better and better, you'll find that the root system gets more and more compacted as well. You get a lot more fine feeder roots around close to the trunk. You start getting rid of those big, thick, heavy roots that have been circling around the pot, and you can gradually bring these things in. And that's how you can get them to go from a very large growing tub into a really nice small bonsai pot. It never happens overnight, but it's something that you plan for. And every time you repot, you gradually take it back, and you gradually take it back, and you're reducing the size of that pot till ultimately you get to something which is perfect for that tree. So you want to make sure that you're not jumping the gun too quickly. But if you are already in a bonsai pot, don't look to upsize the pot. Try not to look at upsizing the pot. There may be reasons that you have to upsize the pot. It might be to increase the vigor of the tree. The tree might be really struggling as it is, and it needs more root growth, which then equates to more foliage growth, which then equates to a stronger tree. Whatever it might be. But in general, if you've got a really healthy bonsai and you're doing a healthy repot on this thing and there's no major issues, then look to use that scale where the pot is shorter or narrower than the canopy width of the tree, and I think you'll find that you'll get a massive bang for your buck. The other thing is the depth of the pot. The depth of the pot plays a massive part in your perception as to how heavy it is. So if you've got let's say it's a light framed or light trunked bonsai that's a good height, let's say 60 centimeters, something like that. It's quite narrow trunk, starting maybe at 3 or 4 centimeters and going up literati style, for want of a better word, just a really light structure, light framed tree. But then you get a really heavy lipped pot with a very deep structure to it as well, with big fat feet on it. That pot is going to overwhelm. And even if it's sort of, the width of it's correct, but you've got that big heavy depth and it's a big thick lipped pot as well, it's going to start overpowering the tree. So the pot has to match and has to suit the tree. You can't have it where you've got one overpowering the other. And likewise, if you've got a big thick trunk bonsai and you get a tiny thin little pot that's maybe way too shallow for it, that makes the tree look like it's going to tip over at any drop of the hat, and it's not stable enough for it, it's going to be very underwhelming, and it's going to make it look funny, look weird. Whereas, you have a big thick trunk, you'd have a nice big thick deep pot with a nice big thick lip on it too, so it all looks robust and like it's formed together. You have a really light, dainty trunk, then you have a light, dainty pot that looks like it fits in, it works in conjunction with the design of the bonsai, and the two should complement each other as opposed to compete with each other. That's really what it should be. Complement, not compete. And if you can get it right, then it's an amazing combination that you get. The other thing you can think about too with your potting, there's a lot of people get into it now in the southern states of Australia, is freeform pots or bits of stone, something completely different, left of centre. Is there something that you can do to change the generic feel of your tree? And I think stone. Do your research on the internet, work out how to make muck, because once you work out how to make muck and how to secure and drill through pieces of slate or pieces of stone to secure trees on there, suddenly your vision or your potential for expansion of the design of your trees jumps through the roof. You don't always have to go with what's readily available at bonsai nurseries. You can definitely go for freeform pots or the pot makers that we've got, I know around the world, but especially in Australia, the freeform pots that we're getting that really suit our natives are just incredible. So I suppose this is just a timely reminder for everyone to say that if you are looking at repotting, then match the pot or the container to the tree. Don't force one to the other. Difference if you're coming out of a grow pot to a bonsai pot, you can make a transition to something that's sort of maybe not ideal, and thickness of pot really doesn't make a difference. If all you're doing is getting that root ball used to being in a smaller space, then you can transition down to it. That's perfect. That's no problems at all. But if you're at the stage where you're ready to get this thing and say, okay, this is going to be a sort of almost forever pot for this tree, then just make sure that it's one that's going to allow the tree and the pot to work together and become better for being together, as opposed to competing with each other. That's really what you should do. And make a decision. Floundering around and holding things off. This repotting only happens every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the tree. It shouldn't happen every year, so it should be stretched out a little bit. So if you're getting ready to go, then make a decision on it and stick with it, and make sure that you've got everything perfect for when you do it, because it's a long time to be looking at these things when you're unable to change it again. Now, you should know by now, as we're into season 6, so the 6th year of this podcast, and this is episode 27 for this year. You should know by now that not one of the most important things, the most important thing for me when it comes to bonsai is the health and root system of your bonsai. Okay? If you don't have a healthy root system, then really, you've got to focus on that first, because that talk I just did in the previous section about pot size considerations and 2/3 or 3/4 the width of the canopy and all that stuff. If you've got a really poor root system, forget it. There's never going to be a way that you can reduce down the soil mass that you need to have enough root system to be able to ensure that you've got healthy growth. I just had messages come through about a tree that I looked at 12 months ago that had the root system completely cut off, got put for the first time into inorganic media, and I got shown a photo of what the root system looks like after just a very short period of 12 months, and it's incredible. It's chalk and cheese. Like that tree now is on a springboard to take off and go nuts, but you can't do that without a really strong root system. So that making decisions I talked about in the pot medium and what the pot and structure of the tree, and it just won't work without a solid root system. So anyway, that leads me nicely into the next section, which is talking about securing your trees when you're repotting. This is a massive thing that I do. Massive. I have had comments made that I'm a bit too heavy-handed when I'm securing the trees in the pot, but I'm not. I want to have it where I can, after I've repotted the tree, I can pick the tree up by the trunk, give it a good rattle, and nothing moves. Absolutely nothing. The pot doesn't rock. The tree's not going to fall out of that pot. And that's the test that I do when I take the tree out of the pot, I get the pot ready, put in the drainage layer, put in a light layer of the soil, get the tree, work the roots, cut the roots, put it in, secure the tree into the pot. And before I put any medium in there, I pick up the tree and give it a little rattle. If I can do that and know that the tree's not going anywhere, then I'm absolutely laughing. But when I do it, the thickness of wire that I'm using to secure the tree in the pot is really important. Really, really super important. Now, I only use aluminium wire. And the larger trees that I have, always around the 2.5 mil size wire, and for the really super small pots, something around the 10 centimetre, something like that, 10, 15 centimetre pot or smaller, it's a 2 mil wire. And that's purely because the size of the drainage hole that's in those smaller pots, if you're putting a 2.5 mil wire in there, it can get a bit thick and can clog up those little holes. So I just think it's overkill for a tiny little tree like that to hold it in as well. 2 mil is strong enough. Now, a couple of things. The reason why I use aluminium wire, it will stretch and break before the pot breaks. If you use, say, 3 mil or heavier, 3 to 4 mil for a really big tree, or if you use copper wire or steel or something like that, as that root system grows over the years, and don't forget, let's just keep in the back of our head, these trees are going to be in these pots for 2 to 4 years, okay, depending on the growth rate, stage of development, blah, 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 all the usual stuff. So if you've got something that's secured with copper, and copper has no give, like no stretch whatsoever. So you secure it in there, looks great for the first year, root system starts to grow, the tree starts to push up. It's naturally going to start filling that potting media, the pot, with roots, and it's going to get more and more dense over time. By about the third year, that thing's going to stretch so much that under pressure, that pot may well break and crack. Whereas when you use aluminium's got stretch in it. It's nowhere near got the strength that copper or steel does. And as it stretches up, you'll get to the point where the wire will break by itself. So it's a nice fail-safe for me to know that I've got the grip on the tree at the first time that I start when I do the repotting. I know that while I've got no roots to hold that tree in the pot, that wire is going to do its job. It's going to hold the tree very steady. And the reason why it's really important to hold the tree steady is that as those new roots grow after repotting and it comes out of dormancy, as the new roots start to grow, I don't want any movement on the trunk, because any movement on that trunk from wind, knocking, being watered, whatever it is, will break those fine roots. And if you don't believe me, when you start repotting and you see those fine white roots that are wrapping around the pot as you lift the tree out of the pot, just get one with your finger and try and bend that root. Just gently try and bend the tip of that root, and you see how brittle and how quickly that root will break. Now, if your tree moves in your bonsai pot 1 millimeter, the trunk rocks it all in that pot, then I guarantee you that those new roots will start to break and be damaged. And I'm all about maximizing the potential of the bonsai by not wasting resources. All right, that's why I repot slightly on the earlier side. So when the tree releases the stored resources that it's put there for going through dormancy, I haven't wasted any of that. The tree hasn't started growing roots before I take it out and start cutting the roots off, because it's diminishing the availability of resources to the tree from what it's supplied to itself or stored away over the winter period. So if I tie a tree in after I've repotted and it starts growing new roots and the trunk moves and those roots break, then the tree's got to go back, heal those, and then start growing new roots again. So it's just a waste of resources. Whereas if you just get a couple of nice tie-in wires, secure the tree appropriately in the pot, and if you the system that I use for tying things in is the 4-way tying. Now, if you want to know what that is, jump onto my Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel, because the most recent video I've just put up is how to repot bonsai of a European hornbeam, and it details everything. The complete process of how to repot a mature tree or a tree with a solid root system, and it shows you step by step the 4-way tie-in to secure the tree. And I love it because it wraps around the root system as opposed to going across the trunk of the tree, and holds it down in every corner of that pot. So anyway, I like to make sure that when I tie in, I'm tying in securely, I'm tying in with a heavy enough wire that is going to give me the job that I want, but that the wire will break or will thin out and snap before the pot snaps over time. I've also got an approach that I use with my trees that once, let's say I've got an older tree that I repot it and I say, okay, you really need to be controlled, and your repotting frequency is going to be more towards the 3 to 4 year mark, maybe 5 years depending, 3 to 4 year mark for my trees, as opposed to the 2 to 3 year mark for some of the younger stuff that's being developed that I want more aggressive growth out of. If I determine that they're going to be sliding towards that latter part, then I'll also keep an eye on those tie-in wires. And once I get to the point where I'm past the 2 year mark on the trees, and I know that they've got another year or so to go in there, then I'll get my wire cutters and I'll walk around the yard at the start of spring and I'll start cutting those tie-in wires, because if I can get that tree and grab it by the trunk up high so I don't damage the bark, of course, but if I can get that tree up nice and high and try and move it, but there's no movement in that root system because the tree has grown enough roots to secure itself in the pot, then I'll start cutting those tie-in wires, especially if they're going across the nabari or the root system of the tree, because I'll start to cut in and do some damage there as well. But once I get past that about a 2-year mark, I'll start cutting those tie-in wires in bits and pieces, just to make sure that I'm not going to run the potential risk of snapping a really nice, antique Japanese pot or something like that from the tie-in wires. I'm not going to take the risks. I don't cut them from underneath the pot. I cut them from on top of the pot just as they're going across the nabari, which is where I think the damage is going to be done. But I can't push hard enough the fact that securing your tree properly and appropriately in the pot so it's not going to move. So you can do that post tie-in pickup of the tree and just give it a little wobble, and if nothing moves or it feels nice and secure in there, it's going to be a sleep easy for you and you're going to have a stronger tree. You might be doing everything completely correct. You might be using a really good soil mix, like what I do, the pumice-based stuff. You could have it in the best position. You could have the ultimate fertilizing regime. You could have the best watering known to bonsai. But if your tree is not correctly tied into the pot, then I guarantee it's all just a waste. Bonsai is never about one thing. It's never about one magic thing that if you do this one thing, you'll have the best bonsai in the world. It's not. It's about doing everything perfectly. And tying it in, it's not a hard thing. It's just something that you have to practice. And when I first started doing it, what I used to do was get a pot. I'd rig it up where I'd be practicing putting the mesh in there and using my tie-ins for the mesh. I'd put in the tie-in wires as well. And then I'd get a piece of wood. So before I even started doing it with trees, I'd put a piece of wood in there, and then I'd practice my 4-way tie-in. So then when it came to doing it under pressure, I'm not sure if you're under pressure when you're repotting, but under a time constraint of repotting your bonsai, and let's say it's your favourite bonsai in the world, something that you've grown from seed and it's 150 years old, and you love this thing more than life itself, and it comes to repotting and it's a nervous time. It's like, Jesus, I don't want to stuff this up. I want to get this right. It's like anything. I say it about wiring. I say it about sports people or anyone that's really good at anything in the world. It doesn't just happen. It's one of these things that you need to get muscle memory on. You need to practice. You need to get it all right. And doing it when you're not under pressure is the ideal time. And pre-repotting or just sitting around, get an old pot and practice. Put a bit of wood in there. Put in your double tie-ins, do the 4-way tie-in or whatever method you're going to be using, and just practice it and get it right. So when it comes time that it counts, that it makes a difference whether you do it right or you do it wrong, then you'll get it right. It's like riding a bike. Honestly, I come back to repotting or decandling or pinching, whatever it is, and the first time I do it, it's like, geez, it's been a while, I hope everything's going to be okay. And then I get into it and bang, it's back, because I've done thousands and thousands and thousands of trees being repotted now. Like in 2 weeks, I'm over 100 trees. Well and truly over 100 trees now. It's got to be up around 120, 130 trees. And there's about 75 of my own trees in there that have been done. And you get very efficient at it. You just can't get sloppy. It's one of those things that when I start getting really tired and when I start getting exhausted, it's like, you've got to have a stop, mate. Don't do the next one. The next one can wait till tomorrow. Go and put your feet up, have a cup of tea, maybe close your eyes for half an hour, because it gets to the point where, like anything, when you start rushing or when you start getting, I don't know if lazy is the right word, but you start cutting corners on things because you just want it done. You just want it finished. That's the time you got to stop. Don't even do the next one. Just leave it. Come back to it tomorrow and do it when you're right, because the tree, keep in mind, it's 2 to 5 years. This thing's going to be in this pot, and you've got to get it right. You've got to get it perfect. Everything counts on a solid root system and a really good root system. So repotting is not something we breeze over and go, oh, I'm glad that's over. It's like, This is the most exciting time. This is the best thing for me when it comes to bonsai, because I know that all these trees that I've done now, like next 2, 3, 4 years, all the plans that I've got in the back of my head can all come to fruition because I've done this part right. I've tied them incorrectly, and I can't stress that enough. I'm not trying to give you stress or anxiety over tying your trees into your pots, but practice it, research it, work out how you're going to do it, and then make sure that you do it appropriately. So we are smack in the middle of winter, and it's a really good time now to stop, have a look around the yard. Yeah, it is busy. Like repotting, without a word of a lie, it's one of the busiest times. I know I say that a hell of a lot in the podcast because I don't know, just a lot of trees means that you're busy. But repotting is really one of the most important and the busiest times of the year, and it's easy for me to take my eye off the ball about what's happening around the yard. So this is just a pleasant reminder to everybody that you've still got things to do outside the workshop, outside of repotting your trees, and they're really important. So now we've gone from in Melbourne being quite dry and cool to now we've got a fair bit of rain coming around the place, and it's a real pleasant reminder that overwatering at this time of the year can become disastrous. You've got to be so careful with the variety of trees in your collection. You're watering, you don't just set and forget and go, well, it's wet outside, I've got to just ignore everything. You still got to make sure you do that walk around every day, no matter how miserable it is. I chuck on my parka and walk around the yard and have a look at all the trees and just double check, because sometimes, based on the canopy of the tree, things may get too dry, especially things that are like, say, your evergreens or your conifers, where they've got foliage on them and they're still doing something. They're coming out of a dormancy period, heading towards, next month is my repotting time for my pines and conifers. So they're still doing something. So I've got to really keep an eye on these things that, it'd be so easy for me to say, well, deciduous are soggy and wet and overwatered. Nothing needs watering around the yard. But no, they do. There's some of these pines that I've got, some of the big radiatas that are kicking off. I can smell the fragrance they make when they start to grow as well. And, sometimes I've just got to make sure that I don't just lump everything into the one category and say, winter, don't worry about it, it's all done. And the natives too. You've got to be very careful. If you've got Australian natives in your collection, anyone's listening will know that these things can grow almost all year round. So watering of those is really tricky at the moment too. But my focus for now is to watch for trees that are being overwatered, and they develop this sludgy nature to the top of them, and you can feel it with your hands. You walk around and it's not just necessarily moss, but there's sludge, like this real slimy stuff, and you've just got to swipe it off, start removing any moss that's on that tree, make sure that you can remove as much as possible, and understand that it's being caused by being too damn wet. And it's cold and nothing's drying out. So maybe the tree needs to move into a more open area. It may well find that it's in a sheltered spot around the yard. For me, it is. Anyway, I'm talking from experience here, but normally it's because it's possibly sheltered by a tree, or it's in the back part of my yard, which is maybe not getting as much sunlight as the sun's down in the northern hemisphere, heading towards the north. The things that are on the sort of maybe the south side of a fence especially don't get any sunlight at all. So those trees have now all moved to a more open, more exposed area of the yard, maybe where they can get a bit more sunlight, a bit more wind, a bit more airflow, and I find that helps. I also have a scraping tool that I go around and I'll just scrape it all off the side of the pot. And the other thing that you can do is just wedge it up. Use a rock or a stick or a bit of wood or something like that, and just get that pot angled up from one side to the other. That definitely helps the water run down to the lower section of the pot and have the water run out of the pot, but it means that the top section, more importantly, is allowed to drain. So while it's not ideal that you've got some water in the pot, it's far better, and the water table in that pot will drop significantly by being on that angle. Don't don't have it up on a 45-degree angle or anything like that. It just needs to be slightly raised up so that water runs down. So, I find that, often I'll use, for the smaller pots, just a little stone or a pebble from the garden. For the bigger ones, I'll have bits of wood that I'll slide under the trees. But it's definitely something that you've got to do. And moss removal at this time of the year too is one thing that I'm definitely on, because those trunks, that moss just is so aggressive at this time of the year. It'll take off up the trunk. It'll keep water in the pots as well. It won't let the water sort of evaporate out of the soil mix. So I'm really mindful, especially on trees that I know I'm not going to be repotting for another year or so, that I start scraping that all off. It'll grow back. If you've listened to the podcast, you'll know that I'm not a fan of moss on my trees when it comes to day to day. When it comes to being on display, different story. But around the yard, I find that it can sort of give a false sense of where things are at with the trees, and it may also keep them too wet, especially during this time of the year. So I look to scrape all that off. But it'll still cause a bit of a problem for me. So I look to, like I said, I walk around with a little, it's like a knife type thing with a dull blade, and I'll just scrape the top of the pots off that I see, because it's one of those things that might be all right today, but then in 2 days' time, cold, wet, miserable, being in the wrong area, tree can suddenly get that sludge start to come off there. And also frost. There are frosts coming through there. It's one of the reasons why people hold back their repotting start time, is because of the frosts on the forecast. And it is one of those things that you do need to be very careful of, especially fine, delicate branches when it comes to frost. But that's where I have my shade cloth structure, and I can move anything that's delicate and sensitive into those areas. When I know it's going to be okay, I can put it back out onto another bench to a more open area. But I've got a lot of trees in my workshop at the moment, so I've got a lot of benches that are pretty much empty, if not empty, three quarters empty. So I can shuffle stuff around at this time of the year, and it's really, really easy for me to do it. But I've got to keep an eye on it. And as the daylight, I just want to reiterate that as the daylight hours are increasing for us in the Southern Hemisphere, I'm sorry if you're in the Northern Hemisphere where days are getting shorter, but you've had your summer. I want my summer. As our daylight hours are getting longer for us in the Southern Hemisphere, the trees, regardless of what you're thinking, are starting to grow. They're starting to release those stored resources that they've put away through the dormancy period, and they're starting to wake up. So you'll find that we'll go from this period where we're sludgy, we're wet, nothing's happening, to all of a sudden, the pots are starting to dry out now. Oh, okay, now we've got buds starting to pop on the trees. Oh, now we're getting into the pinching process, and look out, here comes the warmer weather. The warm breeze starts coming through with the weather as well. So it is, like I said, we're on the back half now of the winter period. Still a time to make sure that your benches are nice and clear and nice and clean of debris. Make sure that sludge isn't starting to build up on the pots. If it is, start to look at how you can put the trees into a more open area, remove the sludge off there, get your pot angled so the water table inside the pot starts to adjust to be more conducive to that water runoff, and avoid the root rot situation. And while I wasn't going to talk about root rot today, but I will start talking about it, that you'll know when you've got root rot. As you take your tree out of its pot for repotting, you'll get the stench. You'll smell it. It's disgusting. I've had it on a few trees recently that I've worked on, and they stink out the workshop when it comes along. It's a real rotten, putrid smell, and it's just a timely reminder, I suppose, that these things can happen in the best environments and the best conditions, and it's something you need to be on guard for. And excess water is one of the main reasons that you're going to start seeing a bit of rot appear. Now, I must say, I do get a lot of really, really, really lovely messages saying thank you for this podcast, which it's really nice. I love it. I love it that the podcast means so much to everyone that listens to it. But I can tell you that I get as much out of it as what you do, because I believe that one of my my primary drivers in life is to make sure that as many people around this globe enjoy and love bonsai a fraction as much as what I do, because I think that bonsai makes us better people, and trees definitely make us better people in general. But having a love for something and taking that focus off yourself or off your environment that you're in, and being able to, as a human being, focus on something greater than ourselves, which is bonsai, is really good for us. It's I hope it's the ticket that allows us to live forever, because that would be a great world if bonsai lovers were everywhere. It's an incredible hobby. For me, it's an incredible lifestyle, and there's so much to it that I get out of it that it's not always about the trees. Like I said, they're going to recent bonsai events and seeing so many passionate people in one spot together. It just really sparks that thing inside me that says that we're good, and I love it. I really do. And I think if you can get a smidgen, a scraping of what I get out of bonsai with what you do with your trees, then I'll be very happy. And I know that I know deep down that you'll be very happy with it as well. So thank you. That's all I want to say about it. I do really appreciate all the really positive feedback, and I'm so humbled that it's got such a wide reach, and that reach is something which is really doing good, because what's good for bonsai is good for all of us. And if in your microcosm of where you live and what you do, if you can pass on some of the enthusiasm, the bonsai enthusiasm to anyone around you, I don't care who it is, then you should do it, because it's so good for us. It makes me sit here and pump my fist, because it's an amazing experience, and I'm so fortunate and very lucky that I'm in a position where I can help the bonsai world grow in some way to make us all bigger, better, stronger, prouder of what we do. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. Like I said, if it is your repotting time, even if it's not, it's something to think about, because it's one of the major events that we all go through with our trees. And if you're in off-season for repotting and you're listening to this, and it's summer or whatever it is, and it's not a repotting time for you, wherever you're based anywhere around the world, it's a good time to buy pots. Don't tell your partner, but buying pots, you never have to water them. As long as you tuck them away somewhere nice and safe, no one will ever see them, so you can't get in trouble for them. And they last. And you can make sure that when it does come time to repot that really special bonsai in your life, that you've got the perfect pot for it as well. So anyway, you've got my endorsement to go out there and buy more pots. Thank you for listening in. Appreciate it. Like I said, if you haven't checked out the Bonsai Matsu YouTube channel yet, then have a look, because I think you'll enjoy that one. I'm trying to be diverse with what I'm offering on there too. Sometimes it's a quick snippet about what I'm doing. Other times it's a how-to and something which can sort of show you a bit more about how I do things. But all in all, it's meant to be just a bit of a bit more bonsai love out there for all of us. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it as always. See you next week, and until next time, happy bonsai.